tonight's Hidden History segment, we've got this story. Check it out.
This little church in Loudoun County was built by freed slaves. It's rumored they named it Mount Olive for Israel's 1-mile-long ridge east of Jerusalem, which they likened to the town of Gleadsville. Gleadsville, one of the first African-American settlements following emancipation, was named for Jack Gleed, born a slave of George and Elizabeth Carter of Oatlands Plantation.
We know that some enslaved people left during the Civil War, others who stayed we then start documenting in the 1870 census.
Despite documents like Elizabeth's diary and a slave schedule in the 1850 and 1860 census, Oatlands Plantation estimates it has only identified 50 to 60% of the slaves that lived and worked here. By 1860, Elizabeth Carter enslaved 133 people.
Most of them would have been here at Oatlands, but she also had large land holdings to the west of here, near Upperville.
Ellen Thaxton is a descendant of the Carter slaves who later settled in Gleadsville, but because of major gaps in documentation, she's been climbing the roots of her family tree since the 4th grade.
Every day I walked to school, miles to school. I was spit on, called the N-word, and that, I think, made me figure out what was it about me that was different that made people want to call me names.
She was introduced to Janie Redwood, one of the last school teachers who taught at Mountain Gap Colored School in Gleadsville, also a colleague of Ellen's great-great-grandfather and great-great-grand-uncle.
She told me not to forget. I did set on that journey to do that, to learn about who are these people, who am I, from whom do I descend. I'm more than what they called me.
Right after the Civil War, we learned that the schools were packed, the Quaker schools were packed with kids going every day. They demanded to go to school because they couldn't read and write, and they knew in order to succeed you had to be able to do that.
Larry Rader is the principal investigator for the Edwin Washington Project, a nonprofit mandated by the Loudoun County school system to learn about segregated African-American students. About 8 years ago, hundreds of school rosters were discovered in an abandoned schoolhouse in Leesburg. Rosters that include Ellen's great-great-grandfather and great-great-grand-uncle, Bushrod and C.L. Murray.
And I can tell you this without showing you the individual grades. He did very well on his examination, I'll tell you that.
Another box includes what Rader calls an American rarity, handwritten petitions Black mothers and teachers use to fight for toilets, better roads, and better teachers.
Think about this. Mothers and teachers are walking from farm to farm, trying to get people to sign a document that says we want our kids to have a better day in school. They want to keep this teacher.
Right.
So they've written this petition to keep him, and all these people have signed it.
Teachers like C.L. Murray.
And it says that we, the parents and citizens of Noakes School, one of the black schools, petition you to let us have Mr. C.L. Murray as our teacher. Mr. Murray is industrious, of good moral character, and the children learn well under him.
I was struck by how the generation before me didn't talk about it. You know, we're living right next to it, but didn't talk about it.
To close those gaps that leave Ellen and other descendants empty-handed, Oatlands launched an exhibit and online database to encourage ancestral research. The Edwin Washington Project is run out of an old school building in Round Hill, with little protection for its shelves of sacred artifacts. Physical evidence, like this gravesite in Gleadsville, is disappearing. A local man tended to the cemetery until he died. Ellen says simple markers have disappeared beneath the earth.
I think people who still have their grandparents here that are 100, they're blessed. And I say to everyone that I talk to, if you still have your grandparents living, go talk to them, interview them, videotape them. Find out all you can about your history. It's fascinating.
In Gleadsville, this is Rebecca Burnett reporting for WDVM's Hidden History.
Hidden History is presented by West Virginia University Potomac State College and P&G Tabler Station, Martinsburg.
The Thomas Bulk Library in Leesburg, Virginia, has documented about 200 cemeteries in Loudoun County. The library is not in charge of preserving those cemeteries, and in some cases, the county isn't either. WDVM's Rebecca Burnett tells us about the organizations working to remember the forgotten.
This is the future site for Compass Creek, a 550-acre multi-use shopping center. Missing from its site plan is the African-American burial ground, discovered by excavators during early phases of construction.
We hope they'll be preserved, but if they're exhumed and moved, we would like to be involved in helping to place them in an appropriate location.
The developer is requesting to exhume the remains so it can build on the valuable property they're buried in, a request that has to be approved by Loudoun Circuit Court. Despite showing interest in an interview, Peterson Companies did not return our calls for comment. The Loudoun Freedom Center, a nonprofit dedicated to saving such forgotten African American cemeteries, has appeared in court to protest the proposal.
This could be dragged out a while now that we're involved because, typically no one shows up and these things happen. Now it's in a little bit of a snit.
This is a circumstance all too familiar to the Freedom Center, founded by Loudoun's newest NAACP president, Pastor Michelle Thomas, when she stumbled upon another forgotten African American cemetery beside Route 7. This one difficult to access thanks to the new Belmont Ridge Road.
The entire community of Lansdowne was at one time the Coton Plantation. Immediately on the other side of Route 7 was the Belmont Plantation, and these plantations were owned by brothers.
Last month, we met Ellen Thaxton, a descendant of slaves and their children, grandchildren, and so on, buried all over Loudoun, including this cemetery in Gleadsville.
When you go back and find out the strength that your family had and the shoulders you stand on to get here, you want to do them proud.
Until Thaxton alerted the Freedom Foundation, which has agreed to advocate for the cemetery located in one of Loudoun's first African American settlements, it was uncared for. Original headstones, like simple rocks, were missing, either stolen or buried beneath the earth.
Most of them are abandoned, or they're with a church that's now defunct, or sometimes in Waterford, some of the tombstones have actually been used, taken out of the cemetery and been used for stepping stones or back porches.
Mary Fishback is a genealogist at the Thomas Balch Library in Leesburg. About 35 years ago, Fishback inherited the daunting task of locating, documenting, sometimes naming Loudoun cemeteries, including where Ellen Thaxton's family is buried.
I went and pulled up the Lloyd Slack records, and he is in here. Charles Murray is in here. So she was delighted that she'd found him. At least she knows where he's buried, not the actual plot, but she knows where he is buried.
Thaxton's family members are also buried here, a burial ground being cared for by the Freedom Foundation after a man walking his dog discovered what he believed to be headstones.
John had actually put stakes where he had found graves.
It's amazing. Love you. We'll tell your story.
I mean, they're the stakeholders. The people whose family are buried there are the real stakeholders there. They should have the principal voice in whatever decisions are made, and that is not always the case.
Reporting in Loudoun County, Rebecca Burnett, WDVM 25.
Thank you, Rebecca, for that report. Now, the Freedom Center maintains a Belmont Cemetery and is working with the county to take control of the Sickland Cemetery as well.